show is rated 16. Viewer discretion is advised.
His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country.
It was an absolute miracle, first of all, that the Balfour Declaration got ratified in the first place, and secondly, that went into the mandate, that the mandate was actually finally accepted by the British government, and thirdly, that the mandate actually got feet on the ground.
The British betrayed us. The mandate was given to the British to prepare this land for a homeland for the Jews, but they betrayed us.
Because we are Jews and we cannot be stay in Israel, so they send us to the prison. My life, 5 years of my life, I was in prison in Mauritius because I was a Jew.
It's a dark, dark stand on the British authorities. Even the Arabs won't go mad if few ships will arrive at night and unload people.
בניית יהודים מלברוח מאירופה להגיע לכאן, וגם לא קיבלו אותם לא באנגליה וגם לא בארצות הברית, זה היה ממש שיתוף פעולה עם היטלר.
I believe that if the gates were open as they should be, as the Declaration of Balfour, if it would have really been the national house for Jews, very many Jews would have survived.
It was an appeasement, a political appeasement, and paid the blood of the Jews.
My whole family is going to Gaza. We came here, the time we were there, we didn't know. Only we came here to Israel. They tell us that nobody is alive.
During the first part of the 20th century, here along this coast, the western boundary of the historic land of the Bible, the destinies of two nations collided. At the turn of the 20th century, this sparsely populated land, then called the province of southern Syria or Palestine, had been ruled by the Turkish Ottoman Empire for 4 centuries. For more than 18 centuries, the people of the Bible had been exiled from their ancient homeland. Their heart cry to the God of the Bible over those painful 1800 years was beginning to be answered as the way began to open for them to return home to their promised land, the land of Israel. At that time, Great Britain was ruling over almost 1/3 of the world. Its dominion stretched across the earth to the extent that it was said that the sun never set upon the British Empire. The meeting of the Jewish people and Great Britain was to prove to be the crucial turning point in the destiny of both nations. For at least 200 years, the evangelical church in Britain had been sympathetic to the restoration of the Jews to their ancient homeland, in what was then known as Palestine.
The church had for nearly 2,000 years been very anti-Israel, very much in the school of Origen and Alexandria, but it was actually when Cromwell came to power that we saw a significant change when the ministers that he appointed the church demanded that they went to Holland to study Hebrew so they could translate the Bible. On their return, they not only said that they had a new understanding of Scripture, they said that Israel had to be re-established in that land and that the Jews needed to be allowed to return to Britain. And that was really under the era of Cromwell. And we see that they influenced the subsequent evangelical and Calvinistic movement from Wesley, Whitefield. Other such leaders were greatly influenced by the Puritans of that time. We also see a huge resurgence in philo-Semitism and the pro-Israel polemic during the awakening of the Brethren movement. And whenever we see a new evangelical movement or a new concentration on holiness, we see a new understanding of Israel as well. People like Shaftesbury and Wilberforce, etc., were very much part of the whole evangelical movement of the 19th century, the whole Clapham sect. And as they were fighting for the abolition of slavery, which they're famous for, they were equally in prayer fighting for the restoration of the land of Israel to the Jewish people.
On continental Europe, political Zionism came to the fore as a result of a resurgence of anti-Semitism following the Dreyfus Affair. In 1897, Theodor Herzl held the first Zionist Congress at Basel in Switzerland. At that conference, Herzl predicted the re-establishment of a Jewish state within 50 years. At his side was an Anglican minister by the name of William Heckler, an ardent Christian Zionist.
There were several people around Herzl who were very, very influential, not least that small school of Anglicans in Europe. They had a profound influence on Herzl, and in fact many would say that they were ones who first taught Herzl, even as a secular Jew, the significance of Israel to the Jewish people.
William Heckler, chaplain to the British Embassy in Vienna, had access to many influential people, including Queen Victoria and Kaiser Wilhelm II, Emperor of Germany, and Heckler introduced Herzl to them both.
There were a host of non-Jewish, well-known people in the latter half of the 19th century who were strong Zionists and supported the return of the Jews to the Holy Land. There were people like Queen Victoria and General Smuts, King Edward VII, the founder of the Red Cross, Henri Durant, Mark Twain. There were all kinds of people.
However, as the 19th century drew to a close, the greatest obstacle to the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine was the Muslim Sultan of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, Abdul Hamid II. Kaiser Wilhelm promised Herzl he would try and persuade the Sultan to allow an autonomous Jewish colony to be established. The German Emperor met with the Turkish Sultan in Constantinople. The outcome was negative, and because of the alliance between Germany and Turkey, the Zionist dream was thwarted for the time being. Meanwhile, the Sultan made life difficult for the growing Jewish population of Palestine by imposing prohibitions on Jewish immigration and on how the Jews conducted themselves in their ancient homeland. The Turks were not popular among the Arabs either. Jiska Edelson remembers growing up in Jerusalem during the final years of Turkish rule. Her father, Avraham Zvi Edelson, was the composer of the famous Jewish song Hava Nagila.
We were neighbors of Eliezer ben Yehuda in Rehov HaChabashim. And every morning when I went to nursery school, I used to go past his home and I used to see him sitting near the window compiling new words.
Jiska's father was a close associate of Ben Yehuda.
One must never forget that he was the one who said when he was a young man in Russia that the Jews must have a language of their own, and that was Hebrew, as it was spoken 2,000 years ago. So this was my experience. I had quite a few Arab friends. We were on good terms. There was no hatred. It was a different life altogether.
Not only was life very different for the Arabs and Jews in the Holy Land, but life was also very different in Great Britain, particularly in the political arena.
There was only one real form of Christianity which was prevalent in political circles, and that was the form of Christianity which took seriously God's word and took seriously the injunction of the Jewish people to return to the land.
In 1917, the Allied armies swept across the Sinai Peninsula into the Negev to oust the Turks from Palestine. On October 31st, the Anzac Light Horse captured Beersheba, which opened the way for the Allies to take Jerusalem. On that very same day, the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George and Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour were in a cabinet meeting in London to formulate government policy for a Jewish national home in Palestine. The resulting Balfour Declaration was published 2 days later.
It was providential. I believe it was God's providence in interaction, his sovereignty, that Balfour and Lloyd George were in those senior positions right at a crucial time. I mean, if it had been Asquith and Gray, who were the previous administration, forget about it.
As I researched the subject, I realized the Balfour Declaration was written by only 10 men, the 10 men of the War Cabinet. And as I took a closer look at the lives of these 10 men, I realized that 7 out of the 10 were from evangelical Christian backgrounds. And these men tended to be quite Zionistic.
It isn't amazing that Lloyd George and Balfour come in right at the very time when our troops are moving across the Sinai, spearheaded by the Anzac horsemen, men on the field that could actually do what was needed. So we had these two incredible things happening together at the same time. If you had one without the other, well, it could have been a different ballgame. Both those things came together. We had Weizmann already being known amongst the British establishment. So the third component coming in. So there were 3 things just fitting in together beautifully at the same time. Another year or later, he might have only had 1 or 2 of those components, and it wouldn't have worked. So, I think it was a miracle. Honestly, I think it was a miracle that it happened, that God put those things together. But I think it was at the tail end of that evangelical interest in the restoration of Israel.
A further 6 weeks of fighting against fierce Turkish resistance brought the Allies to the outskirts of Jerusalem. On the eve of the Feast of Hanukkah in the Jewish calendar, another miracle took place. The Royal Flying Corps took to the skies above the Holy City and dropped leaflets signed by General Allenby calling on the Turks to surrender the city. Allenby's name in Arabic, Al-Nebi, means the prophet. Consequently, the Turks surrendered the ancient city of Jerusalem without a shot being fired.
I was always interested what was going on. I was only 6 years old when I went downstairs and I saw people standing on either side of Jaffa Street. And I asked them, why are you standing here? And they said, Lord Allenby is coming down and we want to welcome him. And before long, I could see the horse coming down Jaffa Street. And everybody was so wild with excitement. We thought that Messiah was coming. This was our thought. Now, he rode all the way and he went as far as the Jaffa gates and dismounted and walked into the old city.
Of General Allenby and the forces from the Egyptian Expeditionary Force into Jerusalem on the 11th of December 1917 was in fact the culmination of the restorationist dream, that dream which had been relevant within British Christian circles especially, but also in other countries for several hundred years, a dream of the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And so the coming of General Allenby here in 1917 really was the fulfillment of much of that expectation from the previous few hundred years.
In 1918, Chaim Weizmann, the leader of the Zionist organization, who would one day become the first president of Israel, came to Palestine to further the Zionist cause. He arrived in Jerusalem to a tumultuous welcome from the Jewish population. However, he found that the British military administration was less than enthusiastic.
The British had control over lots of Muslim people at that stage. The British administration that was here in place by then wasn't sympathetic at all. The most, if not all, I'd say most, of the administrators that came and filled the various positions in what was known as occupied enemy South originally, a lot of those guys had their stripes, you might say, in Arab areas as administrators. So they came up and they began to fill these positions. So just imagine the Zionist organization coming in saying, well, we've been given this promise by the government that this would be a Jewish homeland. And they're sort of thinking, never heard that. Or if they had heard it, they didn't want to acknowledge it.
They didn't see it as their obligation to proclaim or publicize British government policy as expressed in the Balfour Declaration, and that was intentional. The British decided, or the British military government decided that was a political issue for which they weren't prepared to get involved.
Right from the start, it was obvious, both to the Arabs and the Jews, that the British administration was anti-Zionist and strongly against the return of the Jews.
But despite the lack of enthusiasm on the part of the military administration, Weizmann met with the Emir Faisal of the Arab Kingdom of Hejaz. An agreement was entered into acknowledging the racial kinship that exists between the Arabs and the Jews, and encouraging Jewish immigrants to settle in Palestine on a large scale and as quickly as possible. Faisal added a proviso to the agreement in his own handwriting. Provided the Arabs gain their independence, else I shall not consider myself bound by one word of this agreement. Notwithstanding the formation of a number of independent Arab states, this agreement was later to prove worthless.
In June 1919, General Bowles was appointed military governor of Jerusalem. And when Colonel Patterson, who was friendly towards Zionism, heard that Bowles had been appointed, he was absolutely shocked. And he wrote the following. He said, "I know Bowles well, I worked with him for 2 years. I knew him as an out-and-out anti-Semite who would leave no stone unturned to destroy the Jewish national home, root and branch. Well, of course, with this kind of attitude at the top, the outlook filtered down to the subordinates, and very, very soon this became the norm. And from that time on, there wasn't either a military governor or later on, apart from Sir Herbert Samuel, there wasn't even a civil governor who wasn't tainted with anti-Semitism.
Despite the opposition of the military administration in Jerusalem, the British government in Whitehall moved ahead to implement the Balfour Declaration. In April 1920, Britain and France met with the League of Nations in San Remo, Italy, to obtain a mandate to rule over the former Ottoman Empire in the Middle East.
The Balfour Declaration of itself has no legal effect. It is a statement of British public policy, just as the White Papers are. It needed to be implemented, and it was implemented by its incorporation, virtually word for word, in the mandate.
In 1919, Colonel Richard Meinerzagen had been appointed by the government in Whitehall as the chief political officer in Palestine.